Welcome to the session, Detailed Study on P2P Cycle. In this session, we will have an elaborate understanding and study on the procure-to-pay cycle in detail. In this session, we will go through different important elements like determination of requirements, source determination, request for quotation, vendor evaluation, purchase order follow-up, goods receipt, invoice verification, and vendor payment. So we will study every single element in this list one by one. Determination of requirements. This is an element where the raw materials will be identified, which will be required for the production process and for storage purposes and so on. So in this stage, the user identifies the required raw material and shares the same with the procurement department for the need. Raw material. So as I said, the user who actually exactly needs the material, raw material, identifies it and requests the procurement department for the inward of the material from the vendor. So the raw material may be existing raw material which is used in the regular production process to manufacture a finished product. It may be a new raw material, so which is required to, or which is more compatible for manufacturing a new kind of finished product in the company, or a rarely used raw material. So a particular raw material which is in use but to the minimum extent, which is rarely used in the industry or in the company. So any kind of the above mentioned raw materials can be determined in this phase. And who determines the requirement or who identifies the raw material? The user, the person. It may be stores personnel who wants to increase the stock level of the particular raw material. It may be production person who wants the raw material in the production process to process or prepare a finished product. It may be a quality person. For some important reason, the quality person wants that raw material to check the standards and give a report to the management and so on. Or it may be a product design person, like a product research and development person. The team may be requiring the material for an analysis or a study for some reasons. Any of the users as shown above or in this slide can ask for the material which is called as determination of requirements. Next, source determination. Source refers to the vendor or a person who is able to supply the required raw material to the company, most probably on a regular basis, or even maybe on an emergency basis also, or a rare case. So determination of source means identifying the source. So in the previous slide, as we saw, it was determination of requirements. So we were identifying the raw material or a material. So in the same case, the vendor identification work will be happened in this phase. So how the source determination task is carried out. So the company, suppose the raw material is a new one, it's a new requirement, and the existing vendors which the company has already are not able to supply this new raw material. So naturally the company looks for new vendors in the market, studies and makes some analysis and identifies potential vendors. The company identifies the vendors in the market, new vendors. So from the quality product point of view and good service point of view, the location of the vendor, on-time delivery point of view, and price point of view, and so on. There may be other factors also, so which helps the management to take decision in identifying the right vendors who are new to the company. So in this stage, the source determination is carried out. The process is carried out. The company looks for the vendor who can give a. The company looks for the vendor who can supply a good quality product with good service, overall service. And the company wants to know where the vendor is exactly located or situated, the geographical location of the vendor, and company wants the vendor to supply the materials on time, so it looks for on-time delivery also. And more importantly, price. The company wants the vendor to supply the materials at a reasonable and affordable standard price existing in the market, so benefiting both the company and the vendor. So these are all few factors at the time when the company is identifying new vendors in the market. Next, quotation, so which is called as request for quotation, RFQ in short. The company approaches vendor A, vendor B, and vendor C as well. So these three are the new vendors identified by the company at the time of source determination process. So the company approaches the 3 new vendors asking for quotation, which enables the company to decide which vendor will be the right selection for the company. So it contacts or collects or a request for quotation to vendor A, vendor B, and vendor C as well. So mainly for asking for quotation, the company looks for mainly 2 points in the process. First, material availability. The company tries to find out whether the vendor can supply that raw material or not. Next, material supply price. The company tries to find out, okay, if the vendor can supply the particular raw material or required raw material, at what price he can supply the material to the company. So these are the prime 2 factors which company tries to collect from the vendor in the request for quotation process. So now company has approached the vendor. Vendor evaluation, which is the next phase in the procure to pay cycle. So in this phase, the company evaluates the vendors for selecting the right vendor for the procurement to handle the procurement activities in future. The company selects a single vendor in this scenario and rejects 2 other vendors who does not meet the parameters or criteria of the company or of the requirement. So it will reject vendor A, it may reject vendor 2, and finally it will select vendor 3. So this selected vendor will be the right person or right vendor to supply the required raw material to the company in coming future. So the company finally decides the 3rd vendor as the right vendor. During the vendor evaluation process, the company evaluates the vendor based on the few parameters like price, quality, delivery, service, and so on. So these are the 4 standard parameters or factors vendor with the company. So these are the few basic parameters which the company wants to look in before or while selecting a vendor or doing an evaluation of the new vendor. Next, now the vendor has been evaluated or selected. So the company wants to do business with the selected vendor from now on, and the company in the next step of the cycle wants to generate a purchase order for the procurement of the raw material. It generates a purchase order to the selected vendor, to the new selected vendor, and in the form of a purchase order document. company releases a purchase order to the selected vendor for the requirement or procurement of the raw material. So now the purchase order has been generated and sent to the vendor for the procurement of the material. In the next step, the vendor will receive the purchase order. So the vendor will agree to supply the materials at the stipulated time or on agreed date of delivery. But still, the company doesn't just keep quiet after sending the purchase order. And for example, the company has sent a purchase order today, and after a couple of days, the company starts doing follow-up with the vendor, like when we can expect the delivery, and when they are going to supply the material, how much they are going to supply, so with what kind of transport they are going to supply, so like expected delivery date and time, quantity supplying, transportation details, and so on. So the company does the follow-up activity of purchase order and tries to get the material from the vendor as soon as possible. So this is purchase order follow-up phase. Now after doing follow-up, the vendor has come up with a result that he will be supplying the materials very shortly, in next 2 days, for example. So as per his commitment, the materials arrive at the plant on the right time, so which have to be inverted or taken inside the plant. So, okay, so this activity is called as goods receipt. So the vendor, with the help of a transporter or through his own transport facility, he supplies the material to the company. And the same material is inverted, unloaded from the transporter and inverted to the quality stock of the company premises in the plant. So this activity is called as goods receipt or goods invert activity. Now the materials have come inside, and for example, almost all the materials are in good condition, in good quality, and so the company accepts the materials in good condition and issues the same to the inward stores, so which is further issued to the production, in the production, used for the production process. So that is one thing. And if you see from the cycle point of view, the next step after goods receipt is logistic invoice verification. So in this step, so after supplying the materials, the vendor sends an invoice asking for payment. For example, after a couple of days after supplying the materials. Here, as soon as we receive the vendor invoice, it is compared with purchase order document of the company, and then the important elements are cross-checked, the important data is cross-checked, and then the vendor invoice will be eligible for getting the payment, or it will be accepted for making the payment to the vendor. So in this scenario, the purchase order reference is very important, which the vendor has to incorporate in his invoice at any cost. So without a purchase order reference, the company does not accept any vendor invoice. So the important elements which are cross-checked with the purchase order and the invoice are: material. The materials should be supplied which is asked in the purchase order only. Quantity, and the supply quantity should not exceed the purchase order quantity at any cost. It should be within. Unit price, the vendor should supply this material, or this particular supply should have the unit price which have been agreed by both the parties, vendor and the company. There should not be any variation in the price, especially the price should not be more. And taxes, the vendor should have added the right taxes in the invoice as per the purchase order reference. So the company makes a comparison based on all these parameters, and then it finds the vendor invoice a suitable one for which the payment can be made. So this step is called as logistic invoice verification. Please note that the procurement team does not make any payment to the vendor here. It just cross-checks the data and recommends the invoice for payment to the vendor to the finance teams. The accounting team or finance team is the authorized people to make payment to the vendor. Or it may also, the important thing is PO reference. As I mentioned earlier, purchase order reference is very important along with all other parameters. Now the company finds the vendor invoice as the right one, and after this step it recommends the invoice for payment to the accounting team, which is called as payment to vendor. Here the company or the accounting team makes payment to the vendor for the supply of the raw materials. So this is the normal standard procure to pay cycle which is followed in the regular business overall. Here we can see that from beginning, like from determining the raw material and up to the payment to the vendor, how the cycle works. So this is the normal standard procure to pay cycle. So we will proceed with further important topics in the next session. Thank you.